Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to your first episode of Stump the Checker. So the instructions I've got set up here are set your virtual background to place you visited and you'd like to share. If you do have a topic that you'd like to bring up, send it to the Zoom chat. Chris will be doing the monitoring for me. So we'll do this as a first come, first serve type of scenario. And since it's your topic, be prepared to share your screen so we can keep the session flowing. So we'll start by you can tell us quickly where your background picture was taken, and then we'll share your screen and ask your question. So I'm actually going to start. I have a couple of very specific things that I want to cover to begin with before we jump over to whoever has the first in line for the Stump the Checker portion. So one of the things I want to, let me do it like this. I'll just give you the overview of what I want to accomplish in this first segment, what you should know by the end of it, and then we'll actually just do this exercise. So I want to talk about how to do a whiteboard type of a discussion where you open up a conversation with somebody, you share with them what you're thinking about, and you have that, that dialogue. As part of that, I want to go into a very specific condition. We'll actually do this this is the thing that I want to talk about. Can you help me with this item? We'll open up the shop drawings, and then part of that discussion will lead us to doing a Bluebeam tip, being able to create a new document, and then copying some data, some information from the shop drawings, putting it onto that Bluebeam session, and then once we've resolved what we want to resolve as part of that chat, we're going to decide at that point, this is a good item to bring up at a meeting. So we're going to publish it to our engineering meeting and then be able to link to a document. So we're going to go through all of those steps on what that would look like. So in this case, let me just close out of this. So I'm going to check in with Chris. I will send him a Zoom chat and ask him if he's available. Oh, let me reconnect to my session here and go back to Vans. All right, so I sent Chris a chat. Chris, are you available? I'd like to check in with you on this zipper mulling condition on Vans.
I'm in a meeting right now. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, I'll get back to you later.
Yes, Bill. What can we do?
Cool. So let's take a look at this condition that I'm seeing on Vans. And I've got a zipper condition. It's on this sheet 209A here. So I'm seeing that there's a zipper mullion at this area that's creating the needs to be able to install this unit last. It's kind of a leave-out bay thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at my detail, I've just got this 1 on 560s occurring, and that's kind of the typical zipper mullion. And then I've got my 2 on 551. So I really only have this one detail for the zipper. But I know if this unit has to install last, that we have to be able to push that mullion set in from the middle. So what I'd like to do is just kind of examine what that might look like if we were trying to install those areas. So over here in this session, I'm going to open up a new Bluebeam document. So I'm just going to go to File and just make a new PDF. So this is going to give me a little canvas to work on. But I want to take some snips of our shop drawings and paste them on this page to be able to maneuver around and see how am I going to install that last unit. So I want to make a pretty big page. So I'm going to take the default and just change it to a 30 by 30, just so I got a big canvas to work on. So now I've got a blank document. What I'd like to do is just take a little snip of what's happening at these 4 units, because really that's what I'm thinking of in this zipper condition. So over here, I'm going to take this snapshot tool, which I have in my toolbar, so it's easily accessible. But I'm going to do a snapshot, and I'm going to grab these units that I want to talk about. Now, when I go over to my canvas, my blank PDF document, I'm just going to hit Control V. That's it. I don't have to do any additional steps there. And that pastes that snapshot for me immediately. So now I have this area straight from the shop drawings, and I can see, okay, I've got split mullion, zipper, zipper, split mullion, and then it continues. Well, I've got these references here for the 560 for my zipper and the 551 for my typical. So really what I want to do is I want to see those mullions all in a row so I can tell what's going to happen with the zipper mullion. So Chris, is this making sense so far? Are you with me?
Yep, I'm right with you.
Okay. So I'll go to my 560 detail on my shop drawings, and that's my zipper condition. So I'm just going to do a similar thing here. I'm going to take a snapshot of that, and the box that I grab with my snapshot, however big that box is going to be how much is going to show up on my little clipboard. Now I'm going to bring it over to this side and paste it in. So here, I want to just paste that pretty much right where that zipper condition is. And I've got 2 in a row. So I'm just going to hit Control V and paste that again. And what I really want to be able to do is tell what's happening in these. So I'm just going to make these lines touch so they're kind of lined up with each other. So this really just looks like what my unit's going to look like with it's installed, where it's zipper to zipper. Now back on my shop drawing pages, I want to capture the typical mullion in that same way. So I'm going to go to my 551 detail, and I'll do the same thing. I'm just going to grab my little snapshot tool, grab from there to there, and then I'm going to paste that in. Now, when I do my paste, you see where my hand is on this document? The paste is going to paste where the hand is. So if I paste it low here, it's going to paste it low. It's unlike Adobe where it would just keep stacking things. So I want to paste it approximately where I want it to land. And then same thing over here. I'm going to paste it close to where I want it to land. Just a slight movement to get it where I want it. So now I've approximated what I want this to look like. In fact, I have the ability to resize this snip a little if I want, and I can get it to even sort of line up with where these mullions line up with my paste from down below. So I've got this nice visual control of, basically it's a whiteboard discussion. I didn't have to get out a whiteboard and draw a bunch of 3D ISOs in order to see what's happening here. I just did this with a quick paste on this document. What I'm trying to determine now is what has to happen to install this last unit. So I have a unit that's a split mullion to zipper. Then I've got a zipper to zipper and a zipper to split mullion. Well, as we pointed out, that detail for the zipper just shows the gasket on the one side. But if this unit is pushing in from the front, I think this gasket might be in the way. So even though these are just snips right here, I can do another snapshot and just take a picture of the unit as big as I want it to be. So I only want to capture how wide I want that unit to be up to here. And now that's on my clipboard. And if I bring that down to this area, hit Control V and paste it. So now I've actually got the ability to see, this is my zipper to zipper. If I go to install this, I want to try to push this into place. And I see what's happening here. If I go to this middle vertical, it wants to hit this gasket before it pushes in. So if I try to install this unit like this, if I just kept the gasket like normal, not going to work too well. It's going to give me a problem there. So in practical terms, what I want to do is actually install this gasket on the zipper mullion on this side, and I want to install it on the zipper mullion on this side. So what that means is that it really, in technical terms, it would need more than one detail in order to be able to do that. We may not get that second detail from the drafting team, so we may have to come up with a profile modifier in order to make this work in the data. So Chris, if you and I were talking about this, maybe we would bring in Pedro to ask him about this. Hey, is this something that we could set up as a profile modifier? Make sure that the whole concept of what we're talking about is going to continue to work all the way through our processes.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think, Chris? Is this going to work where we just put that gasket on both sides and then should install okay? Do you see any weird stuff there?
The only other thing would maybe be those two bulb gaskets, the 42 bulb gaskets. Like what happens when, you know, that's showing two of those compressed directly towards one another, but I don't know how that's really going to be.
Yep, that's a good point. Now, we know that we'll have to have those in there in order for the unit to be weather sealed properly. So since they are a compressible gasket, I think we could just leave them in each zipper mullion. I think the one that's the biggest difficulty for install will probably be this big glass gasket out in the front. So what I want to do then is, let's bring this up at the engineering meeting just to make sure that if there's something that we're not seeing at this point, we let the whole team weigh in on it. What do you think?
I think it's a good idea.
So let's do this. I'm going to save this document. I'll just go to File and Save since it's a new document. And I like to keep this folder on my desktop that's just called Notes for Meetings. Gives me a convenient place to be able to place the documents that I want to post to the wiki. And I'm just going to call this Zipper Study 1. And it's a PDF document. So I'm going to save that. And let's just go ahead and publish to the wiki right now. So we'll go ahead and go to Explorer. And on the home page of the wiki, we have the instructions on where to store documents if we want to link them. So we're just going to go to that folder. It's the Images Docs folder. And then we'll copy this, we'll paste this document in here. So I'll bring it up from my desktop in my Notes for Meetings, and it's the Zipper Study 1. I'll just copy that. Let me go back. Sorry, I did a back button there. Let me go back to the wiki and bring that folder back up from scratch. So now inside of that folder, sort by date modified so I can see it. I'm just going to hit Control V and paste that document in there. And then I should see that. Okay, hang on. Let me go back to my other folder. Having a little technical difficulty here. Let me go back to my Notes for Meetings. And I'll just drag it over. So my copy paste didn't work in that case. As in most programs, there's more than one way to do things. So in this case, I just drug it over. Now I can see it in there. So it's called Zipper Study 1. Well, what I want to do next is go ahead and publish this to the engineering meeting notes. And there's a link on here on how to post things that are a link. So I know I'm going to want this little bit of code here. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm sorry, it's this one. The link to a file. I'm going to copy this. And then I'm going to go to my engineering meeting notes. I'll add this in for today's session or next week's session, whatever is available. That's fine. I'm just going to hit zipper study discussion. And then I'm going to hit Control V and paste that. And then I'm just going to change this name to the name of my document, which is Zipper Study 1. I'm going to tell you who's posting this and then hit save. So once that's complete, I should be able to click on this. Should take me to my document, which is my little study, and then we can have that discussion from there. So that in a nutshell is the mechanics of how to have this discussion. There's a few key points I want to make about this whole concept. So if you want to do a whiteboard type of a discussion, a key point here is that having a verbal discussion with somebody when they're paying attention and giving you some feedback on what you're thinking about at that moment is a great way to be able to get something resolved. You use someone as a sounding board, and in a lot of cases, by the time you're done with that discussion, you will have resolved the thing that you started out as a question, and in the end, it's, okay, I know what I want to do in this case, and then you just move on from there. So that's one of the key points about being able to do this whiteboard discussion. Another one is just the way that you communicate with each other. When you're having a discussion like this, or any other discussion for that matter, it's important to give enough time to listen, to be able to see if the person you're talking with or the group that you're talking with has some ideas or commentary. And don't immediately jump in your mind to your rebuttal for what they're talking about. Because sometimes your discussion may go off on a direction that you're not expecting. But if you've already built your case for how you want to jump in and say something before you let the discussion come to a conclusion, then you may not have time for it to fully develop. So don't be hasty to jump in and say, oh, wait a minute, I remember that one time when I did it this way, because that may throw off the person's train of thought before they have a chance to finish telling their story that they're trying to get out in order to help resolve this condition. So if someone invites you in on a call like this, this is a great opportunity to have that feedback loop. But just be prepared to listen. And when someone asks for feedback, then you can formulate your feedback loop at that point, okay? So a few additional points there is on that Van's shop drawings, we looked at some zipper logic, but navigating in that document, I typed in the page number that I wanted to go to. So I knew that that was the page that elevation was on. There's other ways to get there. You can navigate with the bookmarks. You can do a search for a part number, but that's just a method to be able to navigate around in the document itself. Then the blue beam part of it, you can actually, like we pointed out from the beginning, you can make your own blank PDF page to be able to use as a worksheet so that you can navigate around and work on that. And then pasting where you're pointing with your cursor, also another good blue beam tip. And then finally, when you do post something, let's say we go back to our engineering meeting notes, Because we have a document that's linked to this, when you click on that document, it brings it up. And so you're ready to have that discussion. Keep in mind, in a meeting like this, there might be 70 of us in that meeting. And if you're relying on waiting for somebody to open up a file from some folder somewhere that you're just vaguely alluding to, then that could be very time consuming for the host of the meeting. So in that condition, you want to try to be as concise as possible and be prepared so that if you want to bring up that as a discussion item, that it's available, it's accessible, people can see it easily. You can have that discussion. If you want to open it up as a wide open discussion, make your point and then say, all right, what do you guys think about this? But be prepared, again, if it's easier to share your screen. Oh, I've got this thing on my screen I want to share. Great. Put that in your note that I'd like to do a screen share when we get to this topic so I can show you what it is that I'm seeing. That's one of the points that Joe made at our meeting earlier today. It's like, okay, it's great that we're talking about a specific topic, but if we can see it, it makes it easier to visualize and to point out, yes, we can do this, and no, we can't do that for these reasons. Okay? So those were some of the key points that I wanted to make right out of the gate. So at this point, first, I'm going to open it up. Any questions about just these initial tips and pointers working in sessions, collaboration, sending Zoom chats, creating blue beams, posting to the wiki? A lot of topics covered in this little working session. So I want to just open it up first. Everybody good with that? And no questions about the zipper mullion study? Making a PDF? Everybody's good? Okay.
Bill, one thing I would add to the communication in the meeting regarding people being a good listener is, you know, there tend to always be in any room a couple of more dominant voices, but, you know, everyone here has a really valid opinion. And so by all of us becoming good listeners, you may not just be dominating the conversation. You may be giving someone else the chance to weigh in who has a really good idea. So
I have a question or concern.
Go ahead.
When we see zipper mullions, we usually see them in 2s or 3s, sometimes depending on how big they want the opening, right? Should we keep in mind to have that, the family names for it have a profile modifier, or should we request a second family for when we're flipping the gasket? I think it's a really good idea to have that center unit in between here, have both gaskets, right? Just for this easy simplicity of installation, and it won't get ripped. Is that something we should keep an eye out and request for a new family, or is it just easier for us to just, hey, let's do a profile modifier on both verticals and then call it a day?
So 2 points of view from that. One would be, if we have this as a question that comes up in the family planning meeting, at that point, would Esley's team be able to easily create a left and right version of the zipper so that this is detail 1 on 560 and this is detail 2 on 560?
I think it's possible. We just need to have a reason for why we're doing certain things. So we would be like, hey, we're flipping the gasket, so we need something to drive that, and it's a totally different detail. So for me, it's like, do we want to ask for a new family if possible?
Yep, certainly a valid point. And then the other version of that would be the need to put in a profile modifier. So the current state profile modifiers sometimes are driven by the drafting team. they'll put in a profile modifier if they have to be able to create the Revit model in a certain way to be able to convey what they want the shop drawings to show. There's other conditions where when we start doing the fab process, we see that we need a profile modifier in this case because we have the one vertical family, but we need to have a gasket to be able to go either left side or right side. So, and we would need to actually do a profile modifier during the fab stage. Well, that's doable. We're doing a lot of that on Matilda over the last few days. We're doing a lot of profile modifiers in the Revit model, but it's additional steps and additional work. If it makes more sense, then we could put that in as a checklist item all the way up to family planning. So, and the reason it's important to do it there is that you don't want this to go through the drafting process, come to the 80% review, and then have someone say, oh, let's make a new family here. Because at that point, the drafting team is going to be limited on their time and resources to be able to develop that second detail. But if you develop it at the beginning and it's included in that family request, it should be pretty straightforward for the drafter to include the 1 and 2 on 560 right next to each other, paste those details on their sheet, and then Takeoff has what it needs in order to make those units distinct from each other.
Okay.
All right, so did I pass the first Stump the Checker question?
Definitely.
I have a question. I guess it's more or less a request, Bill. Can you go over like how would you approach, say, like a logic, right? If you were to see a detail and then to either follow the detail or just maybe draw from your experience and say, oh no, this is a better way of doing it. Like something like, just for example, is like say, like this probably doesn't happen anymore. But I remember back then, they would draw a bunch of sill track details with different anchor locations, right? And then all the way to the 32nd and whatnot, but then we always decide I'll just round it up to near 16th and whatnot. How do you approach that?
So one of the things that PCs have to keep in mind is that there may have been calcs that have happened on a project that are referencing how shop drawings are working. So an example that came up yesterday, Denisa had on 825 Industrial, there's a corner condition that actually has a steel hook lug that's bolted onto the corner rather than having a pony tube as a separate item. So we had one of these whiteboard discussions about it, and we pointed out a couple of different ways that we might have been able to approach it. Fortunately, the PM was in that session with us, and they were able to point out that this has been calced with the fastener in that location. So if we wanted to do an adjustment, we may need to go back and get it recalced. So there are some areas like the one that you mentioned, where if you have a sill track that has a little in and out on the anchor. So I'm not familiar with this job, so let's just scroll here and get a sill track condition. So here's an example. So let's say you have this sill track, and in one case it's got the anchor showing here, but again, let's use our little snapshot tool. Let's say in another case, it's showing that anchor is actually placed further back like this. Well, if we use our experience and logic, we should be able to tell that having the anchor placed further back would not benefit the condition. It shouldn't change what happens with the calcs unless there's a very specific reason for it. So one of the things that we want to look at, if we do see that there's some minor discrepancy that maybe we can consolidate into one thing, is to look out for the variable that would cause it to push back. So in this case, let's say the slab was this wide, but the reason that that secondary anchor was pushed back is because the slab was shorter. And maybe we need to have a minimum edge to centerline dimension, and it couldn't be maintained if that slab was shorter on the front. And this is just a hypothetical situation. I'm not saying that that's the case in this scenario. But those are the types of things that as a project coordinator, we want to look for. And if we do see that there's something that, you know, I think we could combine these. Another example, let's say that this had a panel attachment angle on here that was a 1x1 angle, but in the sill track, you've got a 3/4 and then it hits the concrete. So you're like, a 1x1's not going to fit there. Can we use a shorter angle in that condition? Because we're using a shorter angle as a panel attachment in other places like the head. So if you have two different angles showing for a similar condition and one of them doesn't work, maybe you can combine those so that you're using a similar panel attachment angle, a 3/4x1, for example, instead of using the 1x1. So part of it is analyzing what the situation is. And for the PCs, it's always a good idea to be able to have that whiteboard discussion. Bring up those questions to, okay, what do we do in this scenario? We think we can combine these, and then ask if that's appropriate to do it. Okay. And I'll clear off my snapshot since this is a review set. Any additional questions on that one, Eric?
No. Pass with flying colors.
Hey, Bill, I have one thing that when I'm taking details based for the fob, there's only two logics that are gonna use this. Either engineering logic, that would be the first one, like what you discussed there now. It will work or not. If everything will work, I go into construction logic, which is workable in the shop or installable in at the field. So that's how I do the checking also on my details.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. As the project coordinators, we have to make sure not only that it works and it can be fabricated, but we have to make sure that it can be installed as well. So if you have a condition and they're showing fasteners that are hidden, but you can't get to them because there's no access to those areas, then we need to bring up those items, have that discussion, figure out alternate methods to be able to attach the parts together without having these fasteners. Sure, they're hidden, that's great, but you can't reach in there to attach those. And I know Jose had that exact condition on Stevens Creek, where this corner showed parts attached to create a weird corner shape. Okay, looked great, but you can't get in there. So they had to come up with another model to be able to do that. So those types of things do take additional time and coordination, but can you imagine that if you sent that to the shop floor and they came to a condition that they couldn't install the fasteners, then what do? They've got it on the floor, they're waiting. That's not the place where you need to spend your time and your energy. You need to get it resolved at the engineering stage. Okay. Great. Next. No stumpers yet. Okay, I've got a few more items that I wanted to discuss if we got to a little lull where people were not trying to stump me anymore. I mean, I haven't had the question of what time is it in Yugoslavia yet. Okay, that one would probably stump me. But let's move on, and then feel free to type in questions, bring up your set of drawings, the thing that's been bugging you, whatever, bring those things up so you can share. In the meanwhile, let me bring over my next item. So if I'm doing a review on a set of fab tickets, in this case, this was Lumen here. And then let me bring up this one, and I'm just going to bring this as a blank document. So this is just my, an empty Bluebeam session. It's ready to be able to navigate. So a lot of times as I'm working my way through the whole folder, once it's checked, I might leave the print preview on and scan through and try to find any little things that are discrepancies that catch my eye. So for example, if I'd been marking this up because the note to call out this hole had a bunch of extra text that I didn't want to see on there, and I want to make sure that I got that marked off on each one. A lot of times I'm just going to use my print preview and just tab through those. So I'm just using the arrow down key and looking at that specific area to see, okay, is that note what I wanted? Well, let's say in this case I found that that ticket didn't have that thing crossed off, and I wanted to just open that up, make that note on that ticket, and then close it again. So one of the ways that I like to work is to just drag this file onto my set here, and then it'll open it up. Now, if I do, let's say that go to the next one and I want to drag it over. Let's see. There's a point I was going to make that if in some cases, if you have the preview, let's say you're tabbing through and the preview just starts to pop up as you're starting to drag it over, sometimes it will come up with a little message that says, do you want to open this file read only? So in this case, I'm not able to replicate that off the fly, but if you get that note where it's you're trying to navigate over, and because you got that preview and it wants to open it read only, you can just hit the retry button. So for example, if you're the only one working in that folder, if you get that, you can hit the retry, and that will give it enough time so that the preview is not making the Bluebeam think that the file is open, and then you'll be able to open it, which is quite a bit different than Adobe. If you had anything on a preview in Adobe, you would only be able to open it read only, but at that point, it didn't even tell you if it was read only. So Bluebeam has a lot of advantages over that. So that's one of the points of 2 points to this. One is the read only, the print preview, you can actually make your fabs big enough to where as you're navigating through and you're tabbing through page by page, you can get a good visual. So in this case, I can see the things that I'm expecting to see on these pages. And if I come across one that catches my eye, like let's say if I was looking for what happened with this sheetrock trim dimension and I saw that that was at 4 inches instead of 2, if it caught my eye there, I could easily grab that. It's highlighted here in my list, and I could easily drag that over and open it. Okay, so just a couple of points about working with Bluebeam there and print preview. So any questions about that one? And then any Stump the Checker questions yet? Because I've got like 7 or 8 more if you guys want me to just keep going.
I got one. How do you calculate a cut size for a compound miter stack head using math?
Okay, you stumped me. I did that one to Jose.
Actually, thank you.
So yeah, compound miters are very difficult, and you have to know the math on how to do them. Otherwise, a lot of times what we'll do is layouts in CAD. In fact, you'll see if I bring up, this is just a Lumen file, but a lot of times we're going to do layouts in CAD in order to determine cut sizes for parts. So this is an example on Lumen. We had a corner condition. We dropped in the parts, dropped in all the horizontals, and then we actually laid out what the cut sizes were from the cut size to the part. We had some unusual notching that had to happen on the parts. So we did some actual profile shapes so that you could see what's the cut size compared to the chamfered and finished sizes and the dimension A's. And then we've got this listed out, all of the critical information, the dimension point to the cut size to the chamfer, the dimension point to the dim A. And in this case, we also even have this weird full slot connection in order to be able to reach a specialty anchor. So because we had all these unusual things happening, we included those on the layout. Now, I think it's possible to do these for that compound miter as well. That's one that I would be stumped on. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. Nice one, Eric.
Thank you.
Hey, Bill, I did have a question come in privately. The question said, what happened to sharing backgrounds for people asking a question?
Oh, yeah, that's right. So, Jose, what was your background?
Oh,
That must have been Yana.
There you
I'm
go.
the Tirad Pass Islands.
Nice. Okay, Pedro, what was your background?
I don't have any right now. It's the one with the light bulb.
It's the rock wall in Fremont.
Yep. All right, Eric,
Nope, just my room
just your room. Okay.
for now. I haven't left since COVID.
Well, I like Sherwin's and I like Daniel's. And then Chris, you were on earlier too. So what's yours?
This is in Rarotonga in the Cook Islands.
Nice. And you can see mine. It was a bicycle ride past the office a few weeks ago. Main building in Fremont. All right, next up. Like I say, I've got a few more. All right, so next one I want to talk about is on, let me close these out here and go back to this one. I'm going to close out, I'm going to leave this session, and then I'm going to go to 1951 Harbor Bay. So this is going to be regarding the 80% review document. Let's see. There's a lot of documents in here. Which one was it? Let me just double check. It might be this 714 document for approval.
Are you looking for the most recent review?
Yeah, this is the one. So yeah, so this is our 80% review. And if you're on the standard reviewers list for 80% reviews, you should notice that there's stamps on your documents. This is a Kaizen that's primarily made up of the project managers. They're attempting to come up with countermeasures so that we can do quality shop drawings without having a bunch of internal revisions. And so they developed basically a checklist of things to look for when you're reviewing shop drawings. So if you navigate to each of the different types of sections, there's questions that are specific to floor plans, for example. When you get over to elevations, there's specific things to look out for on elevations. Same things with details. So if you're doing an 80% review, the way that the stamps are organized is they have the list of questions. And really, these are the things that when we did a study, people were looking for these items when they were doing an 80% review of the shop drawings. So we wanted to document what should be looked at this point. And then we categorized it by these are items that we want the drafter to have an awareness of and to be checking. This next column is for the PMs. This next one's for the PC. And then the shop and the field were combined at this level to be able to just kind of roll through these and just be aware that these are the types of things that we should be looking for when we're doing the shop drawing review. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't do things like this, where you put your notes on there and your questions. Definitely do that, because that points out the things for the drafting team that the comments either get accepted or rejected when the shop drawing review happens, and then they know what has to be updated for their next set. However, this is a good visual tool for all of the reviewers to be able to know what to focus on, to be able to minimize the defects in these first rounds, so that by the time we get to the submittal stage, we don't have internal problems that haven't been addressed because nobody was looking for them. So keep that in mind as you're doing drawing reviews. Look for the stamps and then use them. They're a tool that's been developed. It's been practiced on the first couple of jobs. The PMs have given some feedback to that Kaizen team to see how it's gone for them, how long it's taking to do this, what kind of buy-in are they getting from it. But as the engineering side, this is also a benefit for us, so that if we participate in these reviews, we use this tool to help do a good study on the shop drawings, then that feedback loop gets back to the drafting team, and that improves the quality of the drawings, so that when we get it for takeoffs, for example, the quality is at a very high level. Okay, let that percolate for a second. Any questions either on this topic, or again, this is Stump the Checker, so if you want to show your background, tell where it's from, you can bring up at the next topic. Otherwise, I have more.
Bill, I have a question.
Okay.
What we can take care when we are going to check transition units? Can you explain us about that?
So for transitions, the transition team, let's see if there's, so there are transitions on here. The transition team has a process in place where they're generating what happens at transitions, so that we have the concepts of how to put the parts together. Because in previous versions of shop drawings, we would get some intersections, you might get a transition occurring, but a lot of times it fell upon the fab team to figure out how to make the connections and make the parts work together. So that was too much of a burden on that last process before it got out to the shop floor. So that process was moved up to the front, and now there's a team that actually does that work, and they build the transitions first. Now, because it's one specific team that builds the transitions, they try to use the same approach when they get similar conditions, regardless of which specific project it occurs on. So in this case, if this was a unit that drops down at a curb, this condition might occur on other jobs as well. So the first thing that you'll see on the transition pages is that it's a method to convey what happens with the logic of the system, and it may not be part specific for your job. So that's why the part numbers are, the parts are shown without specific part numbers. Your system might be a little narrower, wider, a little deeper, might have different glass thickness on it, but the concepts of it are here. Now, in the transition on the shop drawings, there's a snip. Basically, it's a picture of the isometrics of these conditions. However, these are available in CAD if you want to open this in CAD and get a better sense of how the parts are working. Sometimes in a 3D model, if you look at it and you're able to rotate it around and see how the parts come together, how they intersect, you get that better sense of what kind of fabrication, notching, sizing, etc. that you have to do in order to make it work. So those are available if you want to be able to see this in the 3D version. But they're not job specific. They'll give you the sense of it, but you can view them in CAD to be able to tell. For your job, you may have some break shapes that are associated with this. And Saul's team would have to use these transition details to help develop what those break shapes are to make sure that they're part of the package to be able to put that transition condition together. Okay.
And did Edwin have an image to share?
Yes. Edwin, what's your picture?
It's the construction of a Walmart in El Salvador.
Very good. All right. Next up, I do have a few more to close out the hour if we don't get some more questions popping up. All right, so let me go to the next one. This is, let me leave this session. And then you recall that it hasn't been too long that we actually created this folder for project key sheets, so that when we're working on a project, we have one place to go to be able to navigate. So if you have 2 or 3 people working on your job, it's not a problem. This is a studio session here, so you can just go to your studio session and use these key sheets. Once you're done with this, then there's a process on the checking Swiss to take these and remove them so that they get closed out without cluttering what's happening here. So we recently did that on that Facebook Sun. So Francisco and Christian and I went through that process. We removed those key sheets and they're not cluttering up this folder anymore. So that leads us to 2 other items. One is finding and using a Swiss. So if you want to find a Swiss, you go to the portal and over in standard procedures, click on that tab. It's going to bring up all the different Swisses. So we've got the general, sales, project management, and then engineering. In this case, we opened up the checking guidelines Swiss. So we'll open the document. The Swiss is actually a link to the checking guidelines page because there's a lot of detail in here. There was too much to try to set up in this Excel format. So we navigated to the item in question, which in this case was archiving the key sheets after the final weekly release. So we did these steps together. We opened this document up. We followed these step by step to make sure that we understood what the steps were. And since this is a Bluebeam Studio session, we wanted to make sure that we didn't delete somebody else's key sheets, because if that's the case, then we have to go through another process to be able to try to retrieve them. And that relies on Ryan to do it since he's the one that created this studio session. So just that additional point of navigating to your Swiss and using it. Use the Swiss for your guidelines. So a corollary to that I'm going to exit this session. And there's some occasions when the PCs may want to go in and do some glass sizing or do some metal sizing on a document. It's not really something that we want to have a bunch of markups for sizing glass that show up on the real review set that's in the real studio session. So we came up with the project layouts folder. And so in this case, we created this document so we could do some glass sizing. So we just put this on here and we were able to pencil in some glass sizes so that when we got to that point, we had a document accessible. We'd be able to get on here. And if there was 3 or 4 of us that needed to work on this at one time, since it's a studio session, anybody can mark up this document at any time. So just a heads up that we have a place now for the PCs to be able to create working documents. The drafters are not going to look at this, so this is not the place where you put review comments. This is more like, this is the set on my desk that I want to write a bunch of stuff for myself on. Okay. One of the other, okay, so I'll just let that, I've only got 3 minutes. I've probably got more points than I'm going to be able to get to, but I think I want to make at least 1 or 2 more. Any questions on this one? All right, so we've been trying out the concept of pair partnering a lot. It seems to be working very well. One of the limitations that we found on Zoom, however, is that if you don't have Zoom Pro, you're limited to 40 minutes per session. So we've had some teams that have been experimenting with Microsoft Teams. So here, if you get into a Microsoft Teams, the format is very similar to Zoom. You can do chats, you can do video calls, you can call in, you can do screen sharing, etc. It's all available with an unlimited format. It's just a matter of getting set up on Microsoft Teams. I sent Quentin a link to a video that Joseph had done a few days ago, kind of that introduction to Microsoft Teams. So if you go to our Walter Zumwolf YouTube page, you can look that over. It might give you some additional in-depth information about working in teams, since I've only got 1 minute left. And then just one last thing. When you're doing production work, it's always important to know where you're at in your time frame and when you're expected to get things done. But a big part of our work should always be looking for opportunities to improve the way that we're doing our work. So we're doing the project setup team right now. We're looking at completely revamping how we set up data for projects compared to when you get to units by week and you build out every bit of data that you need at that point. So it's been a big study, but it could have a lot of benefits. When you're doing your day-to-day work, you should continue to look for those opportunities to make your work more effective, efficient, productive, simplifying your processes. So just always be on the lookout and be willing to make those improvements. And time's up. All right, Eric wins the prize. He stumped me.
I didn't know there was a prize.
The prize is we're all going to clap for you.
Thank you.
Bill, thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.